particularly for picture-led reporting. And I hope we talk about this later, but TV is absolutely crucial in most media landscapes for people's understanding of climate change. It's not print media and it's not the internet, despite the vast growth. Most people still get the information from TV. And I think there's a real problem in trying to go beyond, for TV journalists, the usual pictures of climate change. There are limited numbers of times that you can put out pictures of Arctic ice, polar bears, Amazon burning, Tuvalu sinking. And that's what BBC TV journalists are really wrestling with now in the run-up to the Copenhagen meeting. How can you find fresh, new ways of conveying these stories that are picture-driven? And I'll just give you one example to finish. What we're going to try and do in the run-up to Copenhagen is have some new ways of reporting sea level rises affecting Bangladesh. And the way that we're going to try and do that is not through sending correspondents out there for a long time, but actually giving small cameras to a number of villages to film that flooding themselves, to be able to have, as far as possible, the most quote-unquote dramatic pictures of that flooding. And that's a new breakthrough, if you like, from big traditional media. And that's the sort of issues we're trying to grapple with. How do you get citizen journalism involved in the treatment of these news issues, to do it, sorry, these old issues, to do it in a new way?
Okay, thank you very much. Let's stay with our journalists for a moment and come to Ranjita Balasubramaniam, who's worked for all sorts of media, television, radio, print, and online. Ranjita, you have experience of reporting for people in those countries, like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. You also have hands-on experience of being in the spot in the aftermath of disaster. To what extent do you think that that demands a different approach in reporting environmental issues? How do we deal with the catastrophes, and how important is it to know your target group there and to present your material accordingly, perhaps in a different way from we would present it for people here in Europe or in the US or in Australia?
I hope I'm being heard or not.
Just speak. If you speak, it will adjust.
Speaking? Yeah,
that's it.
I think I've got it. Yeah, I have to start by saying I've been reporting for audiences in the developing world, as well as reporting from the developing world to an international audience. And I think there is a real difference in the way the issues that people want to see and the demands that editors or producers make of you. About the hands-on experience of being there after a catastrophe or during one and in the immediate aftermath, there is, I think, little doubt that catastrophe sells. Some of us here, as we've already mentioned, Irene, James, we all belong to the media fraternity, and we all know that the moment there's a catastrophe or disaster, we as the media are there, vying with each other for the juicy bits. Now, most of this comes from the fact that people will sit up, listen to us, see what we've got to show them or tell them, and it also kind of is a reflection of the basic human responses to such events, curiosity and awe, I think. The other part, as I said, it consists of, to some extent, one-upmanship and not wanting to really lag behind. That said, I think many of us who are out there during these circumstances do want to tell the story as best as we can, do want to reflect the sentiments of the people there, and I think many of us do restrain ourselves sometimes, despite the focus on sensational things. We do try to tell the story in as humane a way as possible, depending on who you're reporting for, I guess. In Sri Lanka, for instance, reporting for catastrophes, I think a couple of days after, or even the day after the tsunami of December 2004, foreign journalists, hundreds of them, descended on the island, and they camped out there for weeks trying to tell the story of devastation in so many different ways. And people just sat up to listen, I think, simply because it was a disaster beyond most people's comprehension. So I think reporters, I think the media was learning as it went along. I think people were, deployed their big media institutions, the BBC, CNN, and others, sent huge teams out there. A lot of them, I have to say, were stationed in rather comfortable, resorts, if you will, the closest point they could get to beyond which the disaster was really, really enormous and shocking. And to what extent does or do situations like this demand a different kind of approach? I think in the midst of such a huge humanitarian crisis as in the post-tsunami event, we as reporters, as James said, have to find ways, imaginative ways to tell the story. But we also have to, I think, weave this whole aspect of the environmental story behind the humanitarian catastrophe, if there is one, in a very clever and conscious way. I don't think in the immediate aftermath it can be a standalone story. An environment story can't be a standalone story because that's not what people want to listen to immediately. And then you have to find ways to weave that in and maybe as the days go by, introduce the various dimensions, which in any case is the way things pan out because of the simple urgency of the matter. And here's an example perhaps of a positive story out of Sri Lanka, the mangroves in southeastern Sri Lanka. Many experts felt that they helped save the lives of a lot of people, just a few people being killed in some villages vis-a-vis thousands of others being killed in places where there weren't mangroves. Now, some researchers have problems with this kind of an interpretation, but I think it was an active focus of some of the storytellers at that time. And as well, a lot of the NGOs present there in the country were trying to create cash for work projects where people would create these mangroves for, in the case of future disasters. I think I'll stop there and maybe focus on the rest of the aspects as we go along.
Okay, thank you very much. I would just like to bring our Greenpeace spokesman in at this point and ask you a little bit, working from a slightly a different perspective of different from the media journalists. Greenpeace has a reputation in general of not compromising on a lot of issues. No advertising partnerships with companies, no sponsorship, very strict standards on maintaining your independence. At the same time, you do like to make use of spectacular stints. For instance, in rubber dinghies, not bikinis amongst the icebergs, but abseiling from bridges or buildings. Do we live in an age where dramatic action like that is the only way to get an environmental message over to the masses? Don't you think sometimes it goes a little bit over the top? Are you just playing the sensationalist media at their own game?